Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 46th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay. My name is Tanmay Bakshi. Thank you very much for joining me today. And on Tech Life Skills, my goal has always been to make the experience of leaders in the technology industry as accessible to as many people as possible. Now, as part of this, sometimes it's actually counterintuitively almost important to take a look away from the actual technology and instead at, for example, where that technology is developed, how it's developed, or where it's actually applied. And that's actually exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to get to take a look at some of the applications of very powerful technology. Specifically, we are going to dive into the applications of artificial intelligence technology. Now, AI, as we all know, is very powerful. We've already talked last week with Animesh about how exactly AI can be productionized and actually put in real workloads. But the thing about AI is that because it's so powerful, in the right hands, it can do a lot of good, right? It can be a great thing for us as humans. It can make our lives better. But then in the wrong hands, it can actually do a lot of damage. And as a matter of fact, even in the right hands, just applied the wrong way, even accidentally, it can also be a bad thing. And so today, we're being joined by two very special guests who are going to help us understand how exactly artificial intelligence can be applied to do good. Now, specifically, we are being joined by Fleming, CEO of Diaspora AI, as well as Alice Piterova, Managing Director of AI for Good UK. I am very excited to get to speak to Kala and Alice today. And so, without any further ado, let's welcome Kala and Alice to the show.
Hi, Tanmay.
Hi, Kala. Hi, Alice. How are you?
Hi, Tanmay. I'm well.
Thank
Thanks for inviting me onto your show.
Of course, glad to have you on. And hi, Alice.
Hi, Tanmay. Really glad to be here, and especially very happy to meet Kala.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's great to have you both on the show. Glad to get both of your thoughts on the world of AI for good and leveraging powerful technology. I'm very excited to get into our conversation today. But actually, before we even get started and start talking about the world of tech and AI and stuff, I think it would be really interesting for everybody to know a little bit more about what the two of you do. So how about we start off with some introductions? Maybe we can start off with you, Alice. Tell everybody a little bit more about what you do and how you got to doing it, and then we'll move on to you, Kala, as well.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Alice Piterova. I'm Managing Director at AI for Good. AI for Good is a social enterprise that builds sustainable, scalable, and ethical technologies for the most vulnerable and underserved. We do it through partnerships with subject matter experts. In our case, these are charities, NGOs, local grassroots organizations, sometimes governments. We are very happy to be, on the cross section of humanitarian aid and international development. We work across the globe. Some of the projects that we deployed so far are like domestic violence, chatbot for those at risk of domestic violence and abuse in South Africa. We have a similar intervention in India where we talk to young people and adolescents about, taboo topics such as sex and reproductive health. We have an educational project where we educate young people all around the world into AI, but most importantly, skills that we think will be needed for the future. So when we will experience that a lot of jobs will be automated, we would like to be prepared for this future. And we also have a community that we run. So the overall goal of our organization is to help 100 million vulnerable people by 2030. And I got into this like in a very weird way, I would say. I basically started working in corporates, as you can imagine, like working with technical teams, like learning from them, coordinating them. Then I kind of developed a passion for problem solving and human-centered design, working in a think tank, did my master's degree in public policy. And then later on, I just joined a machine learning startup, and this is where I first experienced, like doing some things in machine learning, deep learning, trying things for data kind of exploration, data science. And then, I was invited to join a team at AI for Good, which I'm very happy and very proud to be part of. And hopefully, we'll help them to get to their ambition of helping 100 million people.
Very nice. That's very exciting to hear about. I mean, I can see you've always been passionate about, doing good for society. And I mean, technology is really what makes us human, right? And so it makes sense that technology is at that core of doing good for people. And, you mentioned your goal of helping 100 million. And I mean, of course, I think that's definitely a very noble goal. Something, putting a number to it really helps you actually work towards something, right? And so that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. Now, Kala, of course, I'd also love to hear a little bit more about the work that you do. I know that you have some actual, real world applications that we can talk about of actually using, technology for good. So I want to hear more about how you got to working on it and what it's all about.
Sure. So I guess by definition, I am a social entrepreneur. And then I do run, a technology company called Diaspora AI. And so big picture for what we do, we think about how to help governments tackle water security, but we do it through a technology lens. And so what that means is that, in addition to maybe the traditional ways that you would think about water security, and maybe to back up, so government's preoccupation with water security either involves putting new infrastructure in or thinking about, well, how are we going to manage it over the long term so that the things that we promised, because when we designed that new infrastructure, well, how do we continue to deliver on that promise? And that's what the long-term monitoring and maintenance does. And so one of the things that's been very challenging, especially in emerging markets, is to think about that long-term monitoring and maintenance. It's easy enough to spin up, a new infrastructure project. You get lots of photo ops and everything else, but how do you, monitor it over the long term? So we're preoccupied with that. And what we've, learned over time is that, there are roughly two modes of ways that you can engage in that long-term monitoring. So one is essentially about situational awareness, where the things that you put out, where are they? Are they functioning? How do I know? Because there's no way to manage them if you don't know what's going on. So that's one of the broad opportunities around, how to use technology to do that. Increasingly, we have, spatial intelligence analytics. We're getting more and more powerful with that. And then from a bottom-up kind of perspective, you can literally instrument things, right? So we know over the last few years, lots of discussion about IoT, AI. The thing is that, when you are actually in the wild and not in a factory or an industry, it's a little bit more challenging in terms of price points, and then literally how do you do it so that lasts over the long term. But we've been able to do, instrumentation of water tanks in, remote environments. And so ultimately that helps, a water truck to come more regularly so that people can have, better access to water, as an example. On the other side, though, of the puzzle for this question of, well, how do we maintain things? Then a lot of emerging markets, especially, they have a labor component that can also be utilized and put towards helping support that. So we also think about that side of the equation as well. How might you get either those who are already in the field, there's a huge blue collar sector that we tend to ignore when we have these conversations about what technology is for and who is it for and how does it benefit people. But we see harnessing that blue collar core as a way to serve that bigger purpose of being able to monitor and maintain infrastructure over the long term. So I'll stop there. But in terms of just painting that picture about how we're thinking about it and the different puzzle pieces that we're putting together, that's sort of the big end game that we're thinking about. So maybe for my background and for how did I end up doing this kind of work, I've been around for a little bit, and I've had the opportunity to work in different segments of the water industry. And it's interesting that I work in the fact that I even focus on water, it's been almost a career-long preoccupation, but from different perspectives. So, background-wise, I grew up on a water-scarce island, and at the back of my head, I kind of, as I sort of traversed, academic ladders, there's always just a question of how do I make what I do relevant to that context that I know about. And then as I started to travel, around the world and just get more involved, I realized, so that water scarcity thing that I had to think about growing up, like there were a lot of people who were thinking about this. And it's still sort of this everyday preoccupation. And then, you think about getting educated in the US, and then you realize, well, there are differences and nuances to the conversation. So the way that when an American belly aches about water not being available and not enough money going to infrastructure, it's a real discussion, but it's a different level of urgency and immediacy. So, anyways, that I always just wanted to have what I work on be in harmony to the kinds of things that I was seeing in my environment. And so over my career, I've been able to sort of push what I do to focus on that. So by training, I'm a civil and environmental engineer. I've worked, on just water distribution systems, hydraulic modeling. There are a set of things that engineers do to work on water systems. I've done all of that. But a couple of years ago, though, I got to link up that knowledge and work directly with IBM, in Kenya. And so that opportunity allowed me, and I came in as a domain expert who knew a lot of to help the company. Years ago or so, AI kind of really started to be this thing that people were asking questions about, right? So no longer is it just how to use it for advertising, but can it do more? Can it actually have like a tangible impact in people's lives? And so IBM was asking that question, in Kenya. And so there, I really, with the whole group of folks who sort of came together and converged, in that arena, we really got a chance to experiment and push the boundaries. And so ultimately for this path that I've been on, so I kind of know the basics of how, the engineering of it works, what are the pieces that are missing. But now there's this cool way to think about how you would layer technology into that. And so ultimately for what I do, it's this exploration that, tries to figure out, all right, given the constraints of people, money, budget, and then what the context looks like, what might make sense here? What could work and what might have the potential to scale?
I think there's a couple really interesting points that you mentioned. I mean, there's so much, right? But I feel like, no, but it's actually good because, I mean, actually, I want to start off at the very beginning, right? To start off with one of your key points of bringing something outside of just like a lab environment where you know about the different variables is extremely difficult. One of the more funny examples that I've seen, this one's from Reddit actually. There's a really great like image of a guy. The programmer's just saying, the UI is really intuitive. The users will figure it out. There's a phone with a fingerprint sensor, and the user's supposed to train the phone to recognize their fingerprint. And the phone says, "Hold your finger," and the guy's literally holding his finger. And so. So, taking technology out of a lab environment, especially AI or IoT and these technologies, can be challenging, right? Working with users and the infinite number of ways they will find to abuse software and hardware is just, it's mind-boggling to think. And so that's definitely one huge aspect of the problem. But another thing that I really enjoy is talking about the fact that and really the reason that I say that technology is the thing that makes us human is because precisely what you mentioned, Kala, you saw problems, you had experience actually seeing different people struggling with certain issues, like for example, water infrastructure. And by using technology, you now actually have the power to go and work towards solving that problem, right? That's what I enjoy so much about technology. When you see a problem, you can actually go and solve it using technology. I think that's really incredible. And also the fact that you have experience actually being an engineer and understanding some of the lower level workings of this stuff. I think that's really important and something that a lot of people sometimes overlook. I think that's really important in a field like this one. And honestly, I think it's important in a lot of different fields, right? It's important to have that domain expertise with technology and whatever it is you're trying to apply technology in, I think regardless of where you are or what you're trying to do, right? Even as like an executive in an organization, even if you're detached from technology, or even if you're just, a person working within the organization, I think it's really important to have enough technology knowledge, even if you're not coding every day, right? Having enough knowledge with the technology that your org deals with, I think is really important to work towards innovating, right? Because there's so many times, and this is like the classic thing with machine learning, is there's so many times an executive or a manager might come to a machine learning developer and be like, what if we were to implement XYZ system using machine learning or blockchain or insert other, buzzword here for technology? And, the developers are always like, that's not how it works, right? You can't just slap any random technology on this and expect it to be better, right? Going back to what Mike Tibbs said on the show a little while ago, he was a former VP at a Fortune 1 company and now is a director at Shelter Insurance. Digital transformation is great, but you didn't specify that you're transforming for the better, right? You can transform, you can become more digital, sure, but where did you mention exactly that digital transformation is a good thing, right? So that's something to always keep in mind. And so there's a lot of really interesting challenges there with what you mentioned, a lot of really interesting insights, even just from your intro. And now I can't wait to dive deeper into this. So let's actually start off. I want to ask you a quick question, Alice. So you mentioned that you're now a managing director at AI for Good. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about some of the things that organizations been pursuing and sort of what sort of projects you've been working towards? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how those projects work, what your goals are, and then we can dive in deeper from there.
Absolutely. So our approach is always human-centered design, and we start with putting human in the center of any kind of technology project. One important kind of like caveat here is when we start working with usually a partner, so like the domain expert, the charity, the NGO, we do some sort of a workshop where we first are trying to kind of analyze what is the actual problem that they want to solve. And one like really important point to make here is like not to push them, for the sake of technology, for the sake of AI. Not everything in problem solving is about let's have a tool for it. Not every tool can, solve like big societal challenges. So there's a lot of, human interaction that needs to happen along the side. So this is really important to be like open-minded when you do this brainstorming kind of like event with your partners and try to identify what the pain points are. So not to kind of like lean them towards, let's use this tech or that tech or this platform. This is really important. And obviously, like when we talk to charities and NGOs, they might have a slightly different perspective on the problem. So it's really important to always check with the actual end user, so who you are designing for. And this is when, a lot of actual breakthroughs happen, because the charity might think this is the problem, let's solve it this way. But when you talk to the actual beneficiary of this charity and they're like, no, we have seen this already, we don't want it, we don't want another system to collect our data, it's just not working for us to start with. So there's some bigger problem of understanding sometimes that is like, it might be broken, the communication between the two, so you need to help solve those sometimes first, and when like you actually realize there's a need for your technology, this is where you kind of like chip in and you kind of allow different solutions to be introduced to this domain expert, and then they can choose which one is more feasible, affordable, efficient, and generally kind of like something that they lean towards and that they want to use. So our kind of exploration so far, so for the domestic violence project of ours, which is called High Rainbow, by the way, and it's deployed in South Africa, we started again with a very simple hypothesis. What is the problem? Let's try to solve the problem. So all the kind of literature about domestic violence abuse would tell us that there's a massive issue of underreporting abuse. People are just too afraid to talk about it. They are too afraid to go to police, to go to a charity provider, to go to a specific service. For example, if your abusive partner is suffering from, drug addiction or some other alcohol addiction and stuff like that. People just, too afraid to be stigmatized, maybe, or also it's just like a very intimate problem. Just even to speak up about it, like with your parents or friends, is just really, really hard. And we thought, okay, let's make the reporting really simple for them. And this is when we went to the charity first. So the charity would tell us, yeah, maybe, but how do you solve it? Police is not really something reliable, and we can, direct our users to charities, other charities. Yeah, maybe some of them are reliable, others are not so much, but we can try to do some signposting here and there. But let's do a survey. And we were like, yeah, let's do a user research. Let's do proper survey. We invited people who experienced abuse and did like around 100 interviews with those people. And to be honest, what we discovered there was just, groundbreaking, because we saw that for them, the problem of reporting is something, later during the stage of them discovering the issue, what's going to them, like what's happening to them. So the actual realization that what's happening to you is not normal, it's not okay, you need to do something about it, you need to learn more about it, you need to learn how to protect yourself in this situation, how to protect your children perhaps, or even your family from just knowing that what's happening to you is so sad and depressing. And obviously in this case we thought, okay, how can we help them realize that what's happening to them is actually abusive relationship, right? So we completely changed the discovery phase of our project, from having the focus of reporting abuse to having the focus of how can we help and support them in the process of realization of abusive relationship. And this was like just one learning, right? And the funny thing, obviously, when we started working with the charity told us, we don't have any data. I don't know what you're going to do with your AI stuff. We don't have any kind of like conversations that we can like give to you to design your chatbots to be, AI powered. And we were like, puzzle. How do we solve it? We don't have any data. So obviously we thought, okay, let's deploy something very, very simple without any kind of like AI to start with. Just, very simple algorithm to just pick up, the keywords that would symbolize that there's some, life-threatening situation. So for example, words like, kill or suicide or abuse or, threatening me, this type of stuff. So we just deployed a very simple version of a chatbot, which I think was like an open source technology. So it wasn't anything expensive as well. And the most important point was security and privacy to start with. And this is when we started collecting data. And as soon as we started collecting data and we saw how, first of all, there's already some value from it, because people are opening up even to that simplest version of the chatbot that was not even like, AI or picking up language in the right way or kind of addressing the, queries from people in the right way. But we started collecting data. That was the most important thing. And obviously like validating the fact that people really talk to it and they kind of like have a meaningful conversation. They share kind of like some information about their experience. We were like, wow, okay, there's some potential for it going forward. So this is when we use this, conversation that we generated to actually train an algorithm to understand the language and to understand the words and phrases and context around abuse. Because in a lot of times, as we discovered, people experiencing abuse and violence, they don't use these words. They say it in so many different ways, very subtly, like putting like some words about their situation, like how they don't feel right about their relationships, or they're questioning some kind of like behavioral traits of their partner, for example. And this is what we do all the time. So the same kind of like discovery happened in our second project, which is like sexual and reproductive health. education tool for young people and adolescents in India, with the other project, which is called Future Makers, which is the AI course for young people. At first, we were like, okay, the kind of challenge is to teach people AI skills, right? So to give them, Python programming skills, let them interact with AI services. So like AWS provides a lot of services for free. So we thought, okay, let's just connect them with these tools and show them how they work and like that are easy and interactive and stuff like that. But then we started looking deeper. We were like, but actually what people want is not to learn some coding because even coding will be automated one day, right? So we thought actually what they need is something that they have, which is distinctly different from machines, right? Some skills that will not be automated. So let's focus on these skills. And in the process of real-time interaction with young people, we discovered that, they don't want to learn STEM, not because, it's not interesting to them, but in a lot of times they just don't feel capable enough. And they would be like, oh my God, I'm not good at math, so why should I even try, right? And we were like, no, wait a second. AI and programming is not all about math. There's so many other things you can do in it. And they were like, okay, interesting. And then a lot of them also wanted to have this creative element. So a lot of young people would say, we want to be influencers or bloggers like you, Tanmay. And we were like, yeah, cool, that's great. You can still do it. You can still do it. AI is just like, this extension, this tool that you can use in your, day-to-day job just to make it more efficient and like make it work for you. But like in the end of the day, your creativity will never go away.
Absolutely.
And you can actually enhance it. So we pushed a lot more on this other skills in the further kind of like iteration of the course. And now it's a lot more about creativity, problem solving, sustainable development goals, and like AI for good as kind of like a way to, make it fun for your brain to engage with.
Where were those young people, Alice?
So these young people, we basically launched it in 5 countries last year, including the US actually. So I think we launched it in a school in Georgia. I don't remember exactly the name. I think it was something to do with 30. So it was like a very new kind of like tech focused like school. But all the schools are coding clubs. So for example, we launched it in South Africa again in a coding club. We launched it in a community center in France. And we're going to launch it in Canada as well next year. But the idea is always to think about the communities where, like parents are a little bit more preoccupied with the job. So I don't want to say like deprived communities or underserved communities, but at the same time, we know that in these communities, parents would not have the time or capacity to talk to their children about, don't focus on this subject at school, focus on this subject because they're more kind of needed in the future. So we're like, okay, we'll do this job for them. Let's talk to young people about what's important in the future. So so we kind of like
those external sources of support in terms of just encouraging and nurturing an interest in AI or just digital technologies more broadly. I think having these, external entities that help to nurture and sort of demonstrate that, if I get involved with this, then there's like a path to something, that might enhance my life. And I think sometimes I think sometimes depending on who is offering the service, they kind of forget about that part, especially when you think about governments who might want to push this in schools or whatever else. It's like, yeah, that's an important step, but what are the other layers that you will provide so that it makes it exciting and interesting, right?
Yeah, and a lifelong journey as well, because it's not just, one course that you can have at school, like one module, and then you move on. No, it has to be, a long term.
I have a quick question for you based on one thing that you said. So the customer discovery phase, is sort of this very interesting place where a lot of the formulation around, what needs to be implemented gets done. And I'm just wondering, what can happen when you do that customer discovery is that maybe ultimately for the work that we do, there's always hypotheses that are being involved, that are involved, and the engagement with, the ultimate beneficiary then becomes where you start proving and testing that out. So as an organization that sort of made its hunch around AI and wanting to use it for good, how do you navigate, I think what you were kind of alluding to is that you kind of have this plan for roughly what you think it could be. You go out and have that conversation, and then you're like, I don't know if this is the way to go. How do you pivot, or do you pivot the technology, or do you pivot away from that group? Or like, how do you think about that?
So we constantly just challenge ourselves. So like there's a culture in our team where we challenge ourselves and our own beliefs by just asking questions. And this is why we are so open to to change and to pivot, but at the same time we stick to the same values. And it's really the most important thing is to stick to one value. For example, if we are here to help the vulnerable people, we need to convince the charity partner that we have on our journey, because one thing is like to come and just to give them a tool and just leave them, let it be, basically. Like, we gave you the tool, we empowered you with technology, now you can go and help millions of people, right? And another way is like to work with them together and to actually look into the problem together, show them all the different possibilities that AI opens up. At the same time, tell them you don't need to use the most sophisticated AI yet, because like it might be really costly, or you don't have the right data, or you don't have the right kind of composition of your team to be able to actually take it forward. So we're like, no, let's start very simple. Let's start at the very small kind of like problem definition stage, where we're like, okay, this is the right problem for us, and let's kind of like eventually bring it to the next level of complexity, the next level of maybe like the pivot in that sense it doesn't seem like a pivot. it's kind of like learning and development together. So it's not like an ice hockey stick all the time. It's like a very gradual learning and improvement and iteration. And this is why like human-centered design, to be honest, really helps us, because there's always this loop of building something I would say marginally better than what we had before, then kind of testing it with users, getting their feedback, and then like upgrading or improving whatever you had before. And kind of like having this iteration is really, really something that we strive for as a team. And hopefully this is what makes our technologies better and more actually enjoyable for the end users themselves as well.
Yeah. I mean, making technology useful and enjoyable is honestly, I feel like the only way to do that is by keeping humans in the loop during the design process, right? By having human-centered design, you can actually make it so technology is valuable in the first place. And I feel like something that, as humans, we don't think enough about, and something that I think is a huge challenge for us, is understanding causality. I think that's something that we're not really that innately good at, because in the societies that we evolved in, we had, I forgot the actual number. I think it was somewhere in the hundreds, in terms of the actual like number of people we can maintain, for example, close friendships with, right? Not just acquaintances, not just acquaintances, but actual friendships. Somewhere in the around I think 110ish. But that's the way that we evolve. That's the number that we deal with. And the issue today is that society is so large, so global, so complex that understanding problems in and of themselves, you can't just look at a couple of variables. You need to look at the world as a whole, right? Like, for example, exactly what you mentioned, the problem that we see by looking at raw data and numbers, right, is the issue of, for example, it's not being reported enough, right? Abuse isn't being reported enough. But then, the numbers aren't lying. It's just that we misunderstood the numbers, right? If you actually take a look deeper and you ask, why did we get these numbers? You start to realize it's not that necessarily maybe it wasn't reported enough, but maybe it's that people didn't know they had to do the reporting in the first place, right? And so exactly what you mentioned around the actual causality had to go a step back, and who knows, there might be more steps back to go, right? But if we were trying to solve that second problem, that wouldn't really have helped all that much, even though technically you would be solving the problem that the data tells you should be solving, right? And so understanding these causal links between, hundreds of thousands of different variables and interactions between people and the environment and, societal structures and all these things is just, it's unfathomably complex, right? Individual humans cannot just model all of that in their head. And so, yeah, I feel like that's something that we really don't focus enough about when it comes to solving problems with technology. And I'm glad that you actually do that, right? Keeping humans at the center of everything that you design. There are a couple of questions that I do want to take up from the live stream. Just really quickly, though, from your comments, Alice, I think there's one thing that I will say I have to kind of disagree with, though, and that's actually something where, as you mentioned it, Shiba actually in the live stream chat commented on it because it's something that I've talked about before a lot, and it's about automating coding. That's something. Now, I know I'm biased as a developer, but we're not going to be automating coding anytime soon. And from my perspective, and it's pretty simple, right? Coding's creative as a task, right? One of my new favorite examples is recently there was a problem I had to solve, and it's a problem. It's like a programming problem where you have to feed in a number to a function in the like quadrillions or bigger actually, and you've got to somehow calculate like a sum of squares. It's a whole thing, but the idea of the problem is to see if you can develop an efficient enough solution to solve the problem, right? And while I was solving it, I came up with this like perfect example of the difference between how a computer scientist and a mathematician would approach the same problem. You see, a mathematician, someone who's really great with math and has the creativity and the problem solving to be able to apply mathematical tools to the problem, would have come up with a formula to calculate it practically instantly, right? And that exists. It's possible to do. But when I had seen the problem from like my computer science perspective, the first thing that I thought of was, can I multi-thread this? Can I get this to work on a machine with 196 threads?
Hacking attitude.
Yeah, so I was like, can I go ahead and devise a really, really efficient algorithm to just calculate it manually? And I did, and it took about 2 hours of time, I mean, more like 180 hours of like CPU time to calculate, and I got the right, answer for it. And then after that, I had searched it up, and turns out there was a formula to solve the same thing. So even though math isn't necessary for computer science, right? Computer science is its own thing altogether. Math, computer science, they all come down to that same common problem solving and creativity thread. Now, that problem solving at a micro scale can help you solve, individual technical challenges. At a macro scale, it can help you solve societal issues, right? But, at the end of the day, throughout that whole line, it's still problem solving and creativity that goes into it. How can you put together the little pieces, like, for this example, it was, how can you put together the prime factorization and like the optimizations for figuring out, perfect squares that are divisible by a certain number and all these things, which sort of help you, figure out the solutions to these problems. But, that's just what computer science is all about at the end of the day. It's solving problems. But now, though, I do want to move on to another question there's actually quite a few, so I want to start off with a question maybe from Swarnadeep. He's asking, he has a question, how does technology affect our interaction and behavior? I think we were talking about this actually a little bit just before the stream. And so, if either of you want to sort of comment on how, in your experience, you've seen technology sort of interacting with or sort of affecting the way that we behave.
Should I
want to start?
comments? Well, I mean, I know before the stream, I was giving the example, just of, young people, well, the kids of my friends who, before lockdown and quarantine, that whole thing of they're like, stuck in their iPads and they can't get enough of, Roblox and all of these other games. They're just into it. And like every waking hour, that's all they want to do. And with the quarantine, they got the opportunity to now do that 24/7, and then it became boring. It was like on to the other things. So I think that, well, one, for the line of work that I do, when I think about, technology, I think about maybe the opportunity that it brings and how it might help to shift some of the things that I want to see in terms of mindsets. And so accessibility, is one of the things that has, I think, improved dramatically, right? In terms of, the poorest village, they have access to Androids and iPhones. They figure out a way to fund that, which means access to the internet. And they use that, well, of course, for things like entertainment. But I think we've seen that there are just many beneficial things that have come from that. But one of the things that I think about is the potential to be able to leverage that kind of access to advocate, right? Like be the squeaky wheel that advocates and brings attention to the things that are not working in your community. Because we're able to connect like this, the way we're having this dialogue now, I think many people are increasingly sort of looking at their situations, and then they're looking around the world and they're like, wait a minute, there's a difference here. And so when you have that trigger, that sets the foundation for a lot of cool things, because it means that, one, yes, there's the nice thing of being able to connect into just like-minded communities who want to tackle and address those challenges, the work that you do, Alice. But the other thing that happens then is just this interesting thing where you can now, not that the government necessarily needs additional pressures, because I have the ultimate empathy for, especially for emerging markets governments who've got, huge populations that require extra assistance, their budgets are tight. But at the same time, the opportunity is to, the thing that now governments are preoccupied about is being embarrassed and being shamed because they weren't able to do simple things. And for the people who are now sort of solutions providers who want to be able to work with people to get things done, it's a powerful driver. So when I think about, I guess, maybe technology and what it brings, and maybe I see it through the lens of, maybe the opportunity. Maybe also maybe to circle back, to maybe what the person asked, or that question. There's a question though about, what does the pervasiveness of technology mean, in terms of what people find interesting and what they want to do. So that I guess we also kind of have this transactional thing where, the thing that was cool yesterday, well, I don't know, is that still the thing today? And to the extent that we're talking about social good, I don't know how much that translates. And, well, there are other things that maybe we could go into that, but those are some of the things that I think about. And my excitement is about the power to really sort of shed a light and change people's mindsets about what they want. Because if what they want can be more solidified, you have generations of individuals who've grown up with broken water systems, and like if they only get exposed to that, then they could think that that's normal. Except when they start to see, well, oh, you don't have to do so that's the part that excites me quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I honestly think, sort of to rewind a little bit and to talk about the example with the kids of your friends. I feel like it's the example of the grass is always greener on the other side, right? It's what we can't have that we always want. And right as quarantine started, I remember the mindset for a lot of people was, hey, now this is great. We got a break from work, we got a break from school, and everything will go back to normal in a little while. But since things haven't really gone back to normal, people are like, we want it to go back to normal now, right? We don't want to have this break, right? And there's always, mixed feelings about everything, right? Like, for example, about work from home. Lots of people are really glad that we can work from home now, right? At least, quite a few people can. There's still obviously people that need to, travel to work, but being able to work from home, but then there's also the side of people that are like, no, we don't really enjoy that all that much. Maybe we do want to actually go to the office and be able to talk to people and interact physically, and there's all sorts of mindsets to every part of this. But you're right, being able to formally sort of articulate what someone wants, I think is definitely an important skill. But again, it comes right back down to, I think, that sort of causality element of things is humans aren't really all that good at understanding, I want this, or do I really want this, or do I want something else that's going to cause this, right? Like making that link. And in some cases, we're actually pretty okay at doing so. But in a lot of cases, we aren't. And I'm going to give a really small example, which is insignificant compared to the stuff that we're talking about here. But like for example with iPhones, right? Steve Jobs, I don't remember the exact quote, was talking about how the customer doesn't know what they want until you show it to them, right? Like with iPhone, lots of people would be like, but it doesn't have a physical keyboard, right? How are we going to type on it? And now, a couple of years later, physical keyboards on phones are essentially non-existent, right? It's because people just hadn't been
You
shown
also
that
said
thing. Yes.
they're going to learn it about
Yes,
the home
exactly.
button.
Exactly. They're gonna get used to it.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly the kind of thing is, as humans, a lot of the times we don't know exactly what we want or necessarily why we want it. We want a certain outcome, but we don't know what to want to result in that outcome. Right? So that's something that I think is
And if we
important.
don't even know, we don't always know what's even possible, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
so the exposure, which I think even maybe goes back to some of what you do, Alice. But I mean, how can I dream about what I haven't seen? Like I mean, I guess unless I'm just, this awesome futurist who, I mean, I think for the average sort of, individual, the things that they are exposed to are what maybe helps to start set the seeds for possibility. But I think that's part of what plays into that, right? My imagination is it's like I can imagine about the things that I can kind of see a ladder to in my environment, whether that's literally my immediate environment or online. But if I haven't even kind of, made that connection in that way, how do I even start to, imagine all of these grand things?
Exactly. I mean, in a lot of cases, even when we do understand the art of the possible, it can be difficult to make those links. And when you don't understand what's possible, it's impossible to make those links because you don't know what to make them to, right? And so
Mhm.
that adds a whole other level of difficulty of how do you bring that knowledge to people to help them make those links in the first place. Now, of course, I do want to get to more questions from the live stream. We're getting quite a bit, so let's go ahead and answer some more. Really quickly, I do want to get a couple out of the way first. There are a couple of questions. For example, I see a question from Hamad and from Sarmista talking about, how exactly, give me some suggestions for careers in AI or practice on building machine learning models, as well as Balaji talking about my journey into AI and IBM and so on. So everybody, Balaji, Sarmista, Hamad, I will be answering your questions very soon. Not in today's live stream because I do want to focus more on the work that Kala and Alice are doing. However, next week's live stream, actually, perfectly what a great coincidence, is actually going to be talking about all of these different topics. So make sure you join us next week and ask your questions. I will be able to answer them then. We'll be joined by students. We'll be talking about the future of AI from their perspective and careers and so on with technology, as well as actually Abdul. Please do join next week. But now, though, I do want to go ahead and answer a question from both Kavya as well as, let's see over here, Shiva. I did not see the question from Shiva, but I'd seen it in the live stream chat before. So Kavya is asking, how can we use AI as a solution for natural calamities? And the other question was something along the lines of, how can we use the data that we're collecting from the Earth, as well as different like machine learning systems or AI, in order to understand better the patterns of the systems on the planet in general, right? When it comes to like the environment and weather and so on. I feel like that's an area where we're doing a lot of really interesting research. And I mean, if either of you have things that you'd like to talk about in terms of using AI to understand the planet better, and what we can do with that data. So for example, preventing or at least being able to mitigate the damage from natural disasters, I'd love to hear about it.
I mean, I can mention maybe just a couple of examples that speak to, I think, what that person is asking. So I think one of the mapping and spatial intelligence is one of the things. It's been done in different ways, over the years. But when you think about, natural disasters, they tend to be things that we have risks and probabilities around. So I mean, quite often, typically, for the things that can affect a community, you have some sense that this could be a problem, but maybe not exactly when, but you have some sense that, well, this is a risk and we need to plan for it. So having situational awareness about, well, what can be impacted, to what extent, before it occurs, that's what a lot of the mapping and, sort of spatial analysis tools help you with. And then, being able to do quick deployments and follow up once that emergency, has happened is sort of then the other piece, so you can respond and bring aid. So one of the tools that I think increasingly that's been used over time and that we are also integrating into our work is to think about, computer vision, rooftop analysis, and being able to quickly understand in an area, going to now even, micro levels. I think we're still, like, from the beginning, I always wanted to be able to see water tanks, right from the mapping. It's getting better. I don't know if we're still there. But the idea is that you can, pull up an area, you do a Google search for an area, you figure out the assets that are there by tagging them automatically with, some sort of computer vision approach. And then you can apply analytics to that, that deal with pre and after for monitoring. So that's a pattern. And one of the ways that we're using that now is, we're working on, for rainwater harvesting systems, for example, understanding the communities that need them, how to deploy them, and then over the long term, how do you combine mapping and spatial analytics with other bottom-up tools so that you can monitor and, quickly deploy support as needed, for more water scarce communities. So there's I guess for there's sort of that piece. And then I think for maybe the other piece then with natural disasters planning, so there's the spatial intelligence up front, but once it's happened, emergency resources need to be deployed. And I think that's an ongoing preoccupation, right, of how to continue to figure out, how to deploy people to where they're needed. So two of the ways that we work on that are, well, one, another common pattern is to be able to equip, so I think I mentioned a little bit before about the blue collar set. But if you think about, high school level workers who are able to, I guess just like your Uber driver, right? There's an equivalent of that for the natural environment, but able to, have them be ready to deploy into certain contexts. So whether it's like a flooding emergency or some other water emergency, but having a human who can go out and be of assistance and to, using a mobile app to sort of guide how they do that deployment, that's another thing that we've gotten involved with. I mean, so we work in a non-emergency sort of context at the moment in Jamaica, for example, where we work with young people who want to be plumbers, or they are connected to communities that are hard to access. And that you're able to leverage the familiarity of that community by equipping them with, sort of the skills that are required to audit. And so, in one situation, when you bring new water supplies to communities that previously didn't have it, the process for getting those homes on board and ready to work with that new service, it means that, the leaks that were there and everything else that was, and the things that would end up wasting water and causing them a high bill and ultimately having a bad water experience, you want to have ways to coach them through that. So we train these young people who, many of them are sort of still finding their way in life, figuring out what their careers will be, but they get equipped with both plumbing skills and then water auditing skills, and they're able to go to homeowners and do inspections, and ultimately coach, the homeowners through that process. As they're doing that, they're filling out, they're taking pictures, collecting other information. And so if you plan that the right way, then you have a back end system that's aggregating all of that and doing risk analytics for the water company. And so it becomes this very integrated kind of system that provides the situational awareness that you need, but it also it also enables a process for people quickly. Then, as a precursor to that, when you think about engaging sort of the blue collar set, they exist at different levels of readiness and preparation to engage in that. So we also have other work that's sort of more preparatory, that deals with functional literacy and how to use voice systems to be able to create new opportunities that don't involve going to a classroom where you now must admit that there's certain things that you can't do. So it allows you to, in the privacy of your own home, to kind of catch up. So we're working on things like that as well, that deal with, how do you prepare, this new workforce to be able to support, a community, whether it's, I guess in the normal times where there are still shortages that are occurring, or to be able to ramp them up for emergencies that would occur. So that's some perspective on, or examples of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like something to keep in mind is that machine learning, really technology in general, but especially things like AI, it's something that applies to the whole pipeline. Right, it's not just we apply technology or we apply AI to helping us solve or try to mitigate damage from natural disasters, but also you have to take a look at it from the perspective of what exactly does exactly preventing damage or mitigating a disaster, what does that mean, right? What are the steps that go behind it? Within those steps, what are the bottlenecks in the process? What are the problems that we face? And how can we solve those using AI, right? I feel like that question's a lot more open-ended than we can solve individually. And specifically, I feel like there's some amazing examples of technology in action. Like I believe it was in Rwanda, if I'm not mistaken, they have a blood delivery drone service where within quite literally minutes, if someone in the country needs needs blood for a transfusion, they can get it there via drone really quickly. And to think that that state-of-the-art system, without the power of some really advanced technology, that couldn't exist. But it didn't just solve the problem of, broadly, how can we, make it so that when someone presents to the emergency room, we can get them, help more quickly. Instead, it focused on that specific problem of that larger, umbrella problem of, how can we get blood to a hospital really quickly. And so that's sort of, I think, the way that we need to think about it. And there are lots of different initiatives that are working towards using technology to solve these kinds of problems. Things like, for example, the Call for Code initiative, and more. Working towards being able to mitigate these sorts of the kind of damage that we incur from natural disasters and so on, using the power of tech. And this goes lots of different ways, all the way from how can we use technology to help humans, like for example the logistics of getting people out of an area affected by a certain natural disaster, all the way to how can we get people over there for relief. Right, so that in itself is another huge challenge. Something that I've talked about a lot on the show is we're always afraid of, hey, AI is going to replace us as humans and do our jobs for us. But something that we don't realize is that, no, that's not going to happen, right? Creativity is still a uniquely human trait. What's going to happen is machine learning is going to make us more human, so we don't need to do the things that we only do as infrastructural tasks to keep humanity and society running. Right? Like, for example, imagine if, at the very beginning of the pandemic already, every, cashier at every grocery store was entirely automated, right? It was just an automated system. Imagine if we had these, Amazon, stores all over the place. I mean, in that case, we wouldn't have nearly as many people having to go out in the first place to work physically, and we would have a much better time handling the pandemic situation. Right? Similarly, in situations like disaster relief, if we have automated systems that are working alongside humans in order to help for the relief for a certain disaster, that prevents us from having to design the logistics to get as many people in the area in the first place, and then have humans, which can't really scale that well, help lots of people, right? And so you really have to think about it from a lot of different perspectives. That machine learning, first of all, isn't replacing humans, right? It's shifting the way that we apply ourselves to different tasks, but at the same time, it can enable so much good to be applied at scale. Then again, that comes exactly back to the point of, how can we ensure the ethical usage of that artificial intelligence technology, right?
Hey, you mentioned one thing that's like a pain point for me.
Oh, okay.
So these stores with these automatic checkout things, I want a human. I don't want to do that job. I already shopped. Like, I came to your store, I did the shopping. I don't want to figure out how to scan. I don't want to do it. I want a person. I want to do it the old way. And I don't know if I'm increasingly in the minority and I'm just old school.
No.
But I don't like
it. You're definitely in the majority, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the Walmart. You walk up to the automated checkout and you scan everything. That's boring. I will say that much. That's the part that you dread most about groceries is now I gotta stand there for the next 10 minutes and scan. I'm talking about those new Amazon. I forgot exactly what they're called. I think it was called Amazon Go, or I forgot exactly what it was. The ones
where you can just it's automatically sort of scan. Yes,
yeah,
sure,
literally just put things in your cart, walk out of the store, and it's
but
already
I
charged.
Think, it does speak to, there's a tension, right, between the creative possibilities of technology. There are many things you could do. Right? So, I mean, you could design them, but
not necessary.
There's still a human in the way you have to ask them what they want. And so I think that's the part that's just ultimately never ending. It's fascinating. And I think that tension, it won't go away. And I think that might be, I think at the end of the day, the blocker for some of the projections we have about what's going to take over the world and what's going to dramatically shift it, I don't know how often the calculus of what a human wants, how often do you layer that on? And I think as you go from community to community, some surprising things, pop up regarding that. And it just kind of throws off these, well-made plans about...
Just to add to this point, that you just made, I remember, from one of the funny books actually about data called Everybody Lies. I think I read an example about building resilience for hurricanes in the US actually, and it was a use case from, I think, Walmart trying to prepare for the next hurricane. And they stockpiled all the preserved food and toilet paper and all the other things. But what was interesting is that just before the hurricane, they ran out of strawberry pies, I think. So the funniest thing ever was to discover that people ahead of the big disaster, instead of stockpiling with reasonable stuff, they were stockpiling with strawberry pies or something like that. And I remember I laughed so much, and I was like, oh my God, this exactly explains the nature that we humans have, and that in every region, in every probably community, it's different. Yeah.
I had heard about that one, but yeah, I think it exactly speaks to that point, which is a good thing, right? Because ultimately, if the whole game around digital innovation and AI was simply about who can code the best and who can code the fastest to stand it up, then there are a lot of players that just wouldn't have a chance. But I think what's really fascinating, or in terms of the broader opportunity, which I think some of the folks who are watching are maybe wondering about, if they fit, how they fit. What I always say is that, for wherever you have come from, your community and the set of circumstances around it, nobody knows that better than you. So that's always your competitive advantage. Yeah, you might still need to figure out how to catch up to know what exact recipe of AI, when machine learning something, what data, you might need to figure that out. But if you can understand the unique things that are happening in the world around you that then who else can tell you about that better than you, right? Like you and the people that you know. And so yeah, so I think for those who are thinking about careers and whatever else, yes, you can definitely be a pure coder. But if you're thinking about social impact, and ultimately, things out into the wild, there's a lot of opportunity for you and your insights about the community around you, that allows you to, it's another entry point into the space.
Mm-hmm. I this actually opens up a whole new sort of topic that I want to get into. And as a matter of fact, Alice, I want to get your thoughts on this as well before we move on to another question from the live stream. But really quickly, one thing that I will say is, it comes back to the idea of understanding why. Right? Understanding why is at the very core of so many things that we do as humans. And maybe a good example would be, let's just say I were building a machine learning system to do something maybe not particularly useful, but okay for this example. Maybe I wanted to build a machine learning system to predict how many paper towels I'm going to go through in a week, so it can automatically place the order when I need more paper towels. So I never need to worry about ordering paper towels again. They're just at my doorstep when I need them. All right. Now there are so many variables that go behind that. That is one of the most complex tasks. I just casually said it, and to someone who's relatively new to like AI, it might not seem that bad. It's just, you want to predict usage. It's like a time series modeling task. But oh dear God, the amount of variables that go behind figuring that out is huge. Let's just say you were to start off with a super naive model. All it takes is the day of the week, and it's got to predict how many towels I'm going to use. Maybe there's some kind of general pattern. Maybe, I cook on a certain day a certain meal that requires me to use a certain number of paper towels for a spill that I always have to make, or something on those lines, right? Yeah. And so it'll be able to roughly predict maybe, an okay line of how many I'm going to use. But then let's just say, I decided to buy something else from the grocery store that I usually don't get. All of a sudden, I need more paper towels now because I made a mess. And the machine learning model was completely caught off guard because it doesn't have the data from which to make that inference that I'm going to need more this week. So then you say, well, maybe what if I tie into the Amazon API and I keep feeding it your shopping list, so maybe it can then look at that and be like, hey, this is new, maybe you'll need more paper towels this week, right? So then you feed in that data, but then you realize, oh wait, you had guests over this week and they were using some as well, so now you're using more paper towels. So then you say, okay, maybe now we can feed in your text messages and your calendar, and now the machine learning model can also predict based off of who's going to be coming over and what you're going to be doing. And now you've got all these layers of complexity, and I can just keep going, right?
Yeah, so, don't forget about TikTok. Somebody launched the challenge with paper towels, and then the paper towels will be just not a commodity in high demand, and nobody will be able to get access to it.
Exactly. Yeah, so there's
what are you gonna do with that?
Yeah, there's
it happens all the time. It happens all the time. It's like very simple kind of analogy for this is stock market. So stock market and people that were working with predicting its behavior for ages, they have been puzzling over this problem, because what kind of events lead to the price of some stock going up or down? What kind of events don't have any effect on it? How can you manipulate with that? What happened with the Robinhood? I know you probably heard in the news. GameStop shares the other week, this type of stuff. It's really impossible. We as a society, I think, are constantly evolving, and our behavior is evolving as well with technology. So the point that you raised earlier, the fact that we are getting affected by it hugely. Like even the fact that our attention span is much shorter, or we would like to see certain information in certain formats. So for example, we prefer video. I mean, especially younger generation prefers video over textual format these days. So Twitter might start losing its shares tomorrow. Who knows? I don't want to be like the predictor of that, but basically what I'm trying to say is we constantly change as living beings, and our behavior change, our kind of societal wisdom or whatever situation changes, right? So that's totally normal that certain things will not be predicted, and it's good that it's happening, and it's good that Amazon only knows that we can have this amount of paper towels every week. And then if we need more, we will have to go and order it. The important thing is that we don't forget how to do it. Because with technology adoption, we get lazier, I think. I mean, it's good because it does open up other tasks for us. So we can focus more on self-development, self-improvement, some creativity, some, I don't know, cooking skills in our free time.
Right.
But at the same time, it does make us like, read less, for example, or I don't know, sit without our computer and just enjoy the nature around us. So this type of stuff becomes less and less, I don't know, appealing maybe, or maybe just available to us. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think maybe part of it though is that, we are evolving, right? As the technology is being provided to us, then we got familiar, and then we're like, oh, well, if I can do this, can I do that? And then so we're now changing as well, right? We're not the static people that started over here. We've evolved as well. So how do you account for that? Like how far we end up,
absolutely.
as we're sort of immersing into that.
I mean,
so talking about causality, it's not that simple all the time.
Exactly. It's one of the most complex things we can do as humans. I feel like, actually, I love the example that you gave, Alice, of the stock market, because that's one of the things where, I forgot the exact quote, but I think it's something along the lines of predicting the unpredictable makes the predictable unpredictable, right? Where if someone could predict the stock market with perfect accuracy, then their predictions would influence the stock market, therefore making it unpredictable again, right? So even if you could, you still couldn't. So that's the thing about things like this. They're just so chaotic, where one small thing somewhere could lead to this whole like butterfly effect, right? Where maybe a certain sanction of one country against another could affect the manufacturing process for a certain company that would affect the shares of another one because they were partners with it. It affects, there's all these chains of things that can happen where, a lot of the times we can't understand all of the decision making across that chain. And in a lot of the cases, parts of that chain can actually be false links, right? Like, for example, with I believe it was Australia, where there was that rumor of the toilet paper shortage, and that false link then led to the whole thing of, around the world toilet paper stock is just crashing down because there's not enough for the amount of demand, and all these issues. So sometimes there can be a false link in there, but regardless, the link exists, and so we have to find a way to be able to traverse that chain. It goes back also, Kala, to your example of like the Walmart that was trying to predict the what to stockpile on, and they ran out of strawberry pies, right? It's because humans are just complex, right? Like, you can't understand every single bit of decision making that's going to go behind every customer to be like, people are going to want strawberry pies today, right? It's too complex to do. And technology is evolving so quickly, right? That I feel like even physically, like biologically, humans haven't been able to adapt quickly enough to technology. I mean, getting new parts of your brain to work on certain tasks is a very evolutionarily expensive thing to do, right? Like, for example, one of my favorite things to compare like humans to other primates is like, imagine a game where you're given like just a black screen with white text on it, and there's just 10 numbers on the screen from 0 through 9, and they're in completely random locations. And let's just say you see the numbers, and all of a sudden they're all replaced with just squares, no numbers. And you have to click on the squares in the order of the numbers, right? So you have to remember what the order of the numbers was. Humans take a couple of seconds, and then they're okay at the task. But chimpanzees, they can look at it for half a second, they get it instantly, basically 100% of the time, right? And that's because they have really, really good short-term memory. Like, they're exceptional short-term memory. And humans don't, because when we diverged from chimpanzees hundreds of thousands of years ago, don't remember the exact time scale, that was something that we didn't really need. And parts of the brain that were dedicated to that short-term memory were now dedicated to language, because that was useful to us. And there was enough of an evolutionary need for that. But when it comes to technology, if you misrepresent technology in your head, right? Like, for example, artificial intelligence, if you view that as something that is genuinely intelligent, even though fundamentally from a technical level it isn't, or any other sort of misconception about tech, you're likely not, significantly less likely to survive than someone else who does understand technology, right? And that might change in the future. Maybe it's off by a little minuscule percent here or there, plus or minus. But you're not significantly less likely to exist or have children because of the fact that you don't understand technology. And because that evolutionary cost isn't there, we don't biologically evolve over time to adapt to fundamentally be very good at working with technology. Technology is evolving faster than we are physically. So that's also something to keep in mind when we think about humans becoming lazy. Is in the past, right, because the environment would change slowly enough to evolve with us in that sort of coevolution, we wouldn't have that issue. But now the reason that we need to keep all this in mind is because we're evolving the environment around us faster than we can evolve to best use that environment. So there's just too many variables to keep in mind here, right? But something that I do want to ask you now, Alice, actually, is we've been talking about AI for good for a bit, and I want to know from you, and this is something that I think also answers a couple of questions from the live stream, and also really quickly before I ask, there is a quick comment from Hamad saying, I don't get the point about fearing AI. It's basically just code written by humans, so fearing AI doesn't really make much sense. And I completely agree. Artificial intelligence, it's powerful, so the thing we should fear is people using it the wrong way, but we shouldn't be fearing AI in and of itself, right? And so that's something that I agree with. But yeah, now I do want to ask you really quickly, Alice, is let's just say someone joining the stream today wants to actually start their own AI for Good project. Do you have any tips for them as to how they can actually go about doing so using AI for good?
Yeah, so I would suggest just again, don't fear, yeah, don't be scared of it. I definitely suggest starting small, so kind of like whatever huge societal challenge you would like to solve, like climate change or poverty or hunger or gender equality or life below ocean. So basically there's so many challenges you can start with, but do look at the smaller breakdown of targets because, for example, UN has created this framework, which is very simple, sustainable development goals. Every single goal sounds gigantic. You won't be able to solve it on your own. You won't be able to solve it even as one country, I think. For all of them, you need collaboration of the entire planet. But the sub targets, definitely you can start doing something in every single sub target, from today. Find the users of your technology that you're trying to create. Even before you start building anything, find the partners on the journey. So subject matter experts. There have been people that maybe are not trained to understand machine learning and AI, but don't ignore them. They have been working in this field, like Kala have been working in the field of water and infrastructure and so civil engineering for her entire life. Why don't you just go her and ask for her advice? It's really important that you talk to these people and they participate in the process because they actually know a lot of outcomes already, so they can save a lot of time for you. Users, really important to understand your users, really important to listen to them and not just pretend that you're listening and not just treat them as or poor homeless people in Africa or some poorest regions of this world, they would be happy with anything you give them. No, it's not true. In most of the cases, they know how to go around their life. They know how to solve problems on a daily basis. So if you want to come and help them and they want to participate in your solution and to actually be the activists of change, you have to bring them on that journey. You have to take them with you. You have to respect them, their dignity. And the fact that you're actually intervening with their life as well. You're trying to change things, so they're not necessarily always grateful for it. And obviously, going forward, just try prototype something, use the agile process, build something small, try it out, see how it goes, see how people adopt it, if they like it or not. If it's not working, it's not a reason to stop. It's not the reason to pause and kind of give up. No, actually iterate, improve. Again, talk to Kala or subject matter experts in this area. Talk to the users, try it with them. see how could you improve this, I don't know, user experience with your technology. And in the end of the day, it's not all about technology. It's about, people, the planet, the living beings, and and our way of living, and kind of how we evolve as well as a society. I think from this discussion today, this is something that we learned. That's it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, fundamentally, I think at the core of what you said is remember that we're all human, right? It's that, when we're trying to help somebody, I mean, first of all, having that respect for the way that they already live, and then also being able to, extend that and remember the fact that you're trying to change things. And humans innately don't really like change, right? Change is always that thing that, from millions of years of evolution, we're always thinking, we don't want to change, and so that's something to keep in mind, is that's going to be something that we're all innately afraid of, but is something that, when done the right way, can be really, really good. And so keep that in mind. Also, I see a comment from Jamet Joan Official on YouTube, talking about, I was forgetting the name of, the effect of, how chimpanzees have short-term memory and we don't, but he reminded me, it's the cognitive trade-off hypothesis. That's what it's called. And so that's honestly one of my favorite rabbit holes to go on the internet is to learn more about the cognitive trade-off hypothesis. It's super interesting, so do take a look at that. I do also see, Sanmista, we will be covering your question next week on the 47th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay, where we're going to be talking with students, and we're going to be talking more about like AI and careers in technology and its applications in the future. So do make sure you join us next week. But with that, though, before we end our episode today, and of course, by the way, if there are any more questions from the live stream that we didn't get to answer, feel free to put them in the comments of the show, and we'll be sure to get to you, post the replay being up. However, before we go today, I do want to just ask the two of you, what sort of key points or really message you want to leave the audience with today? I mean, I know we've gotten a lot of questions. You've gotten sort of like a feel for, what the audience is sort of interested in and what they want to do. And so, Kala, Alice, do you have like a message that you want to sort of leave the audience with today? And I guess we'll start off with you, Kala.
So maybe if I go based on what I was gleaning from, some of the questions that you got posed, to the extent that, for the crowd, that there's just general curiosity and interest to use technology in a way where you're feeling as if, whoa, you've kind of moved the needle for like real humans who matter. I think there are just many opportunities to do that. But step one begins with you being, just aware of and being connected to something that you know about. And even if today you're like, well, I don't know about anything, you can come to know about it, right? So either it's literally down the street from you in your environment, or you can begin having conversations, with people, so that you can get to the point of maybe forming something that you want to focus on. At the end of the day, and especially for those of you who then are just, super duper developers, you want to build, you want to go, the actual end user, they care about outcomes and what difference things can make in their lives. They don't really care about how you did it. I'm sorry, it's a tough thing for engineers to hear, but nobody cares. And it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's just that for my life and for what I'm preoccupied with, I'm looking for things that will bring value. So if I'm doing something a certain kind of way today, and maybe you think, oh, I could do it better, then okay, show me, right? I need to be convinced that, changing the path that I'm on, that there's benefit for jumping lanes and doing it the other way. Everybody has that, it makes that same basic calculus, no matter how poor they are, no matter how, it's everybody's calculus. And I think over time, we've gotten a lot better about how to do that, and even recognizing that, okay, I have to think about these things. And so I would just encourage you that, for the path that you're on, there's something that's just really cool about living a life where, yes, you can make enough money to take care of, your needs, but also having a way to engage and connect with others. Because I think for the line of work that we're in, Alice, it's a very social, kind of space to be in, where we're able to make connections. And then ultimately, if we're lucky enough, we get to see that the things that we made bets on, wow, actually did make a difference, for a group of people. So I would just leave with a note of just encouragement. And I'm happy, to, have a follow-on chat or whatever else, for those of you who might be interested and looking for pointers on, kind of how to jump in.
For sure. I will ask you, Kala and Alice, for contact info to put in the description. Feel free to reach out, everybody. I'm sure Kala and Alice would love to, answer your questions or chat. One more thing I will say really quickly is that, it hits really close to home, Kala, what you mentioned about people really care about outcomes, because, as like an engineer-minded person myself, I'll look at something and I'll be like, wow, look at the technology behind that, right? Like my friend will show me like, say like a clip from like, say like a Disney movie or like a Marvel movie or whatever. And, the thing that I'll always be thinking about is how would they have gotten that CGI and the special effects and the neural networks for facial mapping, and that, that's what's always going in my mind. And then like when I get like a new M1 Mac, everyone's going on about it has no fans, it has amazing battery life, it can run all these things, and I'm over there thinking how would they have gotten the Rosetta emulation to work with the Intel memory architecture and the the custom matrix multipliers and all these things, and but what people care about is it's a fast machine that fits in my bag without making any heat.
Yeah.
So, or like when I'm watching a Netflix movie, think about the fact that they're not using Linux in the back end; they're using BSD servers, and like people don't care about this, right? They care
Is the movie good? Like, did it make me laugh?
But yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. People care about outcomes, and the engineering is important. It's critical, as a matter of fact. But even if the engineering is really good, if it doesn't enable someone to do something that changes their life to make it better, they're not really going to care. So that's something to always keep in mind. But of course, Alice, I'd also love to hear from you. What else would you like to leave our audience with today?
I think I already gave a lot of tips, but probably the last one would be, I think what we discussed today about causality and kind of like variables and how some things affect our choice as humans. We are very complex beings, and it's really hard to predict what we want. I think it's really great, and I think we need to embrace that. And I think like Stuart Russell in his book about the human compatible AI talks about creating doubting machines, and this is what would make them less harmful to us, because if they will have this alternative option against 0, 1, there will be like some sort of a doubt. I think that would be more like us, and hopefully more positive, and help us build the future that we want. So this is my kind of like positive thinking about AI. So I really believe in the future with AI, where humans will benefit from it, and not become slaves or chimpanzees that will not understand a word that machine learning is doing to us.
Exactly. It's all about finding that connection between humans and computers, and seeing how we can use technology to do what we do better, right? That's what technology has always been about. It's about augmenting us where we can't do certain things, so we invent technology that can do it for us. Right? That's always been the goal, and there's just so many things that I've sort of been able to glean insight into today. So thank you very much, the both of you, for sharing that. Again, as I mentioned, being the kind of guy that's usually on the back end, actually building technology systems, but then also taking a look at it from an impact perspective. It was great to take a little bit of a break from technical details today to now understanding the societal impact of the technology that we build. Right? It's given me a lot of insight, so thank you very much for sharing that. And of course, thank you very much to everybody joining the live stream today. Really do hope you enjoyed. I do see a couple folks. Thank you for joining in today. Make sure you tune in next week. As I mentioned, we'll be talking to students. It's going to be a really fun episode. Make sure you join us. You'll hear more about it towards the middle of this week. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Kala. Thank you, Alice, for being a part of today's show. It was really fun. Learned a lot. And yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking again in the future. I will be putting your contact description in the description, contact info in the description. All right. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
That was a lot of fun.